Before I get started into my whole presentation here, I wanted to just kind of level set. Again, I'm Dwayne Barnes, Senior Program Manager, Thriving in Resilient Communities at Detroit Future City. Detroit Future City is a think and do tank that collects data, conducts research, and convenes stakeholders to ensure that our programming and policies all align to provide equity for Detroiters, which is very important. The beginning part of this presentation is about kind of level setting and giving some unique characteristics to the rental housing network in Detroit. I want to use a couple of key data points and indicators to kind of paint a picture, tell a story about what's going on in that market, and then we'll follow it up with some more information around the renter's journey. A couple of the data and statistics I'll be pulling from, which I think are very important in painting this picture, are just the housing stock, what's available for renters in the city of Detroit, what is median income, what is gross rent, et cetera. I definitely want to talk about cost burden, and I want to talk about some landlord typologies that we found in some research that we've done as well. So let's give us a quick little way to start here. So we changed a couple of the slides and took some of the visually appealing things off to make it more just straight up and down. And so what you'll see here, and this is a very huge statistic here, is 45% of Detroit's rental market is made up of single family housing. 55% are other rental units. So to make a long story short there, the demand is outpacing the supply. One thing we know in the rental space in the city of Detroit, as in other urban centers, is renting is starting to become kind of more mainstream. In the city of Detroit, there are not enough units to keep up with the demand that we have out there. And so, that gives us as DFC more fire to continue to fight some of these issues that we're looking to make some movement on. This is also a really interesting statistic here. In 2022, the median income for Detroiters was just under $36,500. And the median rent was around $990 a month. These two statistics are important because we understand the formula when it comes to cost burden and severe cost burden on renters, being at 30 or 50% of your income. And so, we're kind of painting a picture as well to say, well, we know the housing stock isn't as robust as it needs to be. Incomes are not as large as we need them to be. And now we're seeing that rents are ticking up as well. So this isn't a good recipe as you think about the renting market in the city of Detroit. And we haven't even got to the other discriminations that happen outside of some of this economic stuff. As we talked about cost burden just momentarily, this is a very interesting statistic here that 61% of renters in Detroit were cost burdened, and another 35% severely cost burdened. So again, cost burden, you being cost burdened in your renting is using 30% of your income on rent and utilities, and severe is 50% on rent and utilities. And we aren't even talking about the other things it takes to keep a family afloat: savings, transportation, food, all those other things. So we're looking at a situation where we were looking at a situation where it looks kind of bleak along those lines. We need more stock, and that's something that we at DFC are analyzing. We need better income, better wages, and we need rents to kind of coincide with income. And so I want to take a moment and level set before we jump into this information. DFC's Center for Equity, Research, and Engagement, along with Data Driven Detroit and the city's HRD, came together and put together a report called, or looking at the rental network. And in that, we did a study of typologies around landlords. And what's interesting about this, so we have an idea of what the stock looks like, and now we want to take a bit of a look at what the landlords look like. So by and large, from these statistics here, and I'm gonna stand up for this part, we see that there is type 1, and look what they own. I'll go back into what represents this type in a moment. Type 2 landlords, and we can see their numbers of the property, the number of properties and the total units, and the number of landlords. Type 3, type 4, and this is the total. Without knowing anything else other than what you see here, we can see that they're type 1 and type 4 are bringing home the leading the race, and then we have type 2 and type 3 behind it. So I want to give a little bit of context on our typologies here. So what you will find with typology 1, and this is in the first column here, you'll see that typically landlords in this capacity own 1 or 2 properties. This is your more mom and pop style landlord. We find 73% of the type 1 landlords to be local. They have a Detroit address. So this is more your mom and pop type of landlord. And as we go over to type 2, still, owns 1 or 2. Of differences, they would have 64% corporate ownership, so we're moving away from mom and pops. 46% on the rental registry, which is a move in a good direction, because in type 1, we don't see that connection of available properties on the rental registry. So it shows to me that sometimes either 2 things are happening. 1, these landlords are local, and people who are looking for them are affiliated with them by neighborhood or a way that they can get to it, because they can't go online and find it, because a lot of those properties aren't found online, aren't on the registry. So as we go further into our typologies, type 3, this is when we start to kind of move a little bit, 30% corporate ownership. So we're starting to tend to see it get more kind of away from your mom and pop type landlords to more of your management type landlords. And then type 4, 62% of their properties are going to be on the registry. We can see the number that they're holding. So they're filling renting those rooms out. 57% own fewer than 10 units, and 87% own fewer than 25 units. So we're seeing more multifamily holding in type 4, and we're seeing more single family holding in type 1. And type 1 and 2 are more common types of landlords. They own a lot. They have a lot of units, and typically, we don't see a lot of evictions and blight notices there. So it's a very interesting rental market. So as you think about this, and I won't steal your thunder in the rentals journey, but as you think about just the options that people have when they're looking for housing in a rental capacity, again, the stock isn't where it should be. Incomes aren't where it should be. Rents aren't where it should be. And so we find cost burden renters. And then we have these landlord typologies. Where are these? Who owns these properties? This 45% are these makeup of landlords. So you're seeing a picture that is bleak in one regard, but it's also inspiring in another regard. It lets us know, especially at DFC, that the work that we're doing, the research we're conducting, the people we're convening, the stakeholders that are coming to talk to us are going to help us figure out how we can make some of these, or play a part in making some of these numbers right. I'll be back with more information, but I wanted to just give a quick update on just kind of what the universe is in the city of Detroit, and then we'll go back later and look at some of the recommendations we have to solve some of these problems. And I will pass to go further into the renter's journey.
All right. I'm going to come up here because I am not quite as talented at talking about things that are behind me. So
it's a talent, I tell you.
I'm a professor. I'm used to wandering around a classroom. So if I start wandering, just let me know. I might grab one of those mobile mics from you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I'm Jennifer Lucarelli. I'm faculty at Oakland University, and I'm a nutrition professor. For 15 years now. Don't do the math on that one. We're just going to let that one go. And I do a lot of community-based participatory research focused on nutrition, physical activity, healthy lifestyles, looking at policies, systems, environments that either help or hinder people from doing the things that we want them to do, right? I can tell you guys to eat vegetables all day long until I'm blue in the face, but you might not do that for a variety of reasons. Maybe you don't like them, maybe they're too expensive, you can't get to the grocery store, your kids hate them, all of these reasons. And so my goal is to remove those barriers. So at the start of the pandemic, I knew immediately that food was going to be a very fast and very urgent need for people. With that first missed paycheck, people weren't able to feed themselves. The first day that schools shut down in Michigan and people weren't able to feed their kids, whereas they were getting 2 meals a day while they were in school. And so I really quickly pulled together partners throughout Oakland County to set up a collaborative mobile emergency food delivery program. And so we rallied dozens of organizations and hundreds of volunteers, and those volunteers picked up food at the student center on campus. They gave me the keys to it, you guys. It was epic, okay? So volunteers would come to the center, and we would load their cars full of enough food for 3 or 4 families, and then they would go deliver directly to these households. And we did that on a weekly basis because we knew they didn't need food just once a month, or the standard qualifying criteria that a lot of food pantries have. We knew that they were going to need regular access to food. And so what was so cool about that is that we had a lot of volunteers that kept the same families. They would deliver to the same people week after week. They got to know them. They helped to meet some of their other needs. They were tutoring kids, bringing them Easter baskets. Like, they really got to know these families. And after some time, we realized that, yes, food was a need, but also housing. They were all becoming very housing insecure, meaning that they weren't sure they were going to be able to continue affording where they lived. With the eviction moratorium, which was great, it helped keep them stable during the pandemic, but as soon as that lifted, we had a huge influx of people into the court systems, being evicted, at risk for eviction, knowing that they need to move, not being able to navigate the system and find the resources that they need to find another home. And so our volunteers started really helping people and walking beside them through this journey, and realized that it is messy, right? It's very, very difficult to navigate. And so over the last 2 years, I've really tried to help map out that process so that it becomes clear to those that need to navigate it, and for those people that are trying to help others navigate it, as well as the different organizations that are part of this system, to really understand, like, what are the other key components of this, and what does that journey look like from the lived experience, okay? The reason being is that as we were sitting in a lot of these meetings, a lot of us that work in this sector go to, we would hear all of these people being super helpful, right? Oh, just contact this organization, they'll hook you up. Oh, this organization can provide for this, or call this number. Oh, look at this website, go ask a church. Everybody's got money to give, right? But then we were hearing from people like, no. This person, was given the same list. They called dozens of organizations. They did everything that we wanted them to do. They couldn't get through. They couldn't get a call back. They were told, no, they don't qualify. No, there's not resources. No, there's no shelter space. And so what they were getting was a lot of no, 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 no. Yet we'd go to these meetings week after week, month after month, with people saying the same things. And so we got kind of mad about it. And that's really essentially where this journey map came from. Okay, that was not a quick background story. Renee, you might need to rein me in on this, okay?
No, I'm just gonna let you go.
Okay. All right, so let's go back to the actual PowerPoint. How many of you guys like Excel in here? Microsoft Excel, Google Sheets? Oh, yes, okay.
I'm among my people.
Yeah. Okay, so this is like this super condensed version of what started out as a massive Excel spreadsheet that had many, many columns and rows that were color-coded based on stakeholders. So this is like the very simplified version of this. We divided it into distinct stages that represent kind of where the person is at and what they need to be doing during that point. And so we've got them finding resources, qualifying for them, searching for housing, being approved for housing, and then staying housed, okay? Now, even if you don't have experience with kind of like the federal housing systems and HUD and vouchers and MSHDA and all of that, if you guys have looked for your own place to rent, you probably are really familiar with what this looks and feels like. Okay, so I'm gonna divide this into two sections as well. So we've got the process of what's supposed to be happening. Then I'm gonna go back and go through that process again and tell you like all of the things that can go wrong during that process. Okay, so we were starting with finding resources. And so again, this is where people are given those lists of all of the official organizations that are HUD funded, sanctioned to utilize these voucher programs that people are supposed to start with. We then also have all of these nonprofit organizations that have similar missions and resources that can help kind of contribute to this system, because we all know that there is never going to be enough HUD funding to actually cover all of the people that need these resources that would qualify otherwise. Now, we kind of divide people into two routes here on the journey. So if people qualify as being literally homeless, and so this is going to be your HUD Category 1 definition, meaning that they are at a shelter, they are living in their car, sleeping on the street, somewhere otherwise considered uninhabitable for people. Or, here's the caveat, if they are staying at a hotel that is being paid for by a nonprofit organization, then they would qualify as literally homeless, and then they go into the Housing Choice Voucher Program and are kind of prioritized for access to those vouchers. We then have others that go through a more traditional Section 8 housing voucher process. And there are varying organizations that manage those locally, and there's varying processes and waitlist times and whatnot. And so I guess the caveat that I should have started with too is that I'm going to present to you guys a very generic process. It is not going to accurately represent every organization's full status, okay? So it varies dramatically, and these are kind of like the commonalities between it, okay? So we know that those Section 8 vouchers, the wait lists are usually closed. Sometimes we've seen them open the wait lists locally maybe once a year, and they're only open for a week or two for people to actually get their name on the wait list. And then it is usually years before their name is actually pulled from that wait list, and then they go into the qualification process, okay? The Homeless Choice Voucher Program, while it is a little bit quicker, there's still an unknown wait time. We don't know when more vouchers are going to be released by the state, and so that kind of keeps people in limbo, not knowing if or when they're going to get access to this voucher, okay? So let's say next they got a voucher. That's awesome. So next is the qualification process, and so this is where they have to submit all of their documentation showing that they meet the criteria. They have minimum paperwork kind of at the qualification process, just because it's a lot of paperwork and people's circumstances might change if their name is drawn 6 months or a year from now. So when your name is drawn, you have 10 business days to show that you meet the qualifications. So you need ID for every member of your household, including children. You need proof of your income or lack thereof. And you have to show for some organizations that you do live in the county in which you are using these vouchers, okay? The paperwork, it seems really simple, like, oh, everybody should have a license or a state ID or their birth certificates or social security numbers and cards, but that's actually really difficult for people to maintain, especially if they are homeless. If they're a victim of domestic violence and have fled that situation, then they might not have those documents. If you're living in a car, where are you going to store all of this along with your personal belongings? So it's actually much harder to get those documentations than you would think. And if you have to go get them, then you have to learn what organization and agency. Oh gosh, I'm adding in the second side part of it where I'm supposed to tell you the problems with it. I might just put it all together, okay? So it takes a long time and a lot of paperwork and money at that point, okay? So then once you meet the qualification criteria, you meet in person with your housing agent and they go over the paperwork with you and you're given a packet of information that shows here's your voucher, here's how much it is for, here's all of the things that you need to consider. Go forth and find housing. So we've got our voucher in hand. Now we're searching for housing at this point. There's a couple of different things that people do. Some organizations have housing navigator programs, which usually involve some staff at that agency kind of providing them with a list of resources and saying, hey, here's where to start. Here's landlords that we know take vouchers or things that might be affordable. Call them and see what their current status is. People also search on their own, like you guys probably would do. You search the internet, you look at Zillow, Facebook Marketplace, rentals. Where else are you guys looking these days? Apartments.com. What's that? Hot Pads? Oh, I hadn't heard of that one. Where? Okay, so there's a lot of places, right? So we can find lots of listings online ourselves. We'll call those people and see if they've anything available that might fit our needs as well, okay? Once we find a place, we're going to apply for it, right? And you're going to pay the application fee, you're going to put together all of your information, and you're going to wait to hear back from the landlord about whether or not you meet their qualification criteria.
You're going to pay the administrative fee too.
I know, I'm trying to save that for my second half. You guys just like are going to chime in when I come back to this process like with all of the things and the fees. You're going to list all of the junk fees that you guys know, okay? And then you determine whether the landlord is going to accept voucher payment. Okay. So if the landlord says yes, then we go into the housing approval process. And so the applicant tells the landlord that they have to work with the housing agency to get approved. And then the agency is going to need to inspect that property, that unit, to make sure that it is up to inspection and habitable for people. We know that there are lots of slum landlord situations that are happening, and they might be renting out places that have some major problems, and so we really want to protect people from that. Then if everything checks out, then MISHDA will do, I think it's MISHDA. There's a lot of different people here. MISHDA, please correct me if I'm wrong on this one. I think MISHDA does the rent reasonableness check, and so they're going to compare this unit to other listings that are within that area to make sure that they're not price gouging, that it is kind of within fair market value of that very specific location, and then they're going to give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So if you've got a thumbs up all the way along here, then you are going to move into the contract and leasing process. You are going to pay your security deposit and your first month's rent. You're going to put the utilities in your name. You're going to get keys, and you are going to move into your house. Okay? And then we want to stay housed. Okay? Once a person's initial lease is up, usually the lease is for a 12-month period. We hopefully want people to renew that lease. Sometimes they do go into a month-to-month lease at that point. If you are using a voucher, then that property is going to need to be re-inspected on a regular basis to make sure that there's still nothing major wrong with it. You still have all of the functioning utilities. There's no mold or anything else like that in the unit. We want to make sure that any of the tenant concerns have been noted, that the landlord is treating them well and taking care of any of the issues. We've got to make sure that the landlord's concerns are being met, that the tenant is treating their property with respect and paying on time. And then we want to make sure that they're not going through an eviction process. Okay, so that's our journey, as it should be, with a little spicy stuff added in there. Okay. Okay, now we get super spicy, okay? So this is the expectations versus reality. Now, before we get super spicy, let's also just start with an assumption of good intent, okay? I think it helps me at least sleep better at night knowing that all of the parties in this system are doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. There's nobody that wants to see our neighbors being unhoused. Okay, but sometimes they don't realize what the entirety of the problem looks like from that lived experience. And so this is really what we're meant to do, is like really share what does it look like. If somebody says, oh, it's a simple process, just go get your identification, what does that person actually have to do? Or if somebody thinks, you know, it's not a big deal if the paperwork at my organization takes 3 weeks, they don't understand that every organization in this puzzle is doing it, and that 3 weeks turns into 6 months, and they have missed the deadlines and lost their voucher. So, assumption of good intent, and then also that some of these things are big things that we probably aren't going to be able to change. We cannot change probably the federal definition of homelessness, but maybe we can change some of the processes and systems that we see happening locally, or maybe we can even just communicate with people better expectations. Okay, what I see too is that when people don't know it's going to be a month before somebody follows up with them, then they start feeling really angsty because they thought it was going to be a day or two. Or if you tell them it's going to be a day or two and then it turns into a month, we know that there's an issue. So setting clear expectations of what things can happen and finding the tiny little pieces of this process that we can change, okay? All right, so finding resources. So again, when people are trying to get access to this system, what most people do is they're going to start online searches. They're going to Google housing help near me, Oakland County housing, homelessness, shelters, resources. Who can help me with this? Okay, so they're going to get lots of information online. A lot of it is going to be outdated. A lot of it is going to be super confusing. It's not refreshed on a regular basis to say, oh, well, we had money for this really cool pilot program, but we could only serve 20 families, and that ended 6 months ago. And so we need to make sure that people are getting real-time information provided to them. There's a lot of communication challenges, and so one of these, again, is that lack of real-time information. So many of the organizations I work with put together these resource sheets, which are great, but as soon as you click convert to PDF and you print that resource sheet, it's out of date. And so it's really hard to keep up with these, and every organization has their own resource sheets, and some are comprehensive, some are not, so that can be really difficult. What we find too, and this is specific to the Homeless Choice Voucher Program, is that you can't necessarily start that process until you are considered literally homeless according to that HUD Category 1 definition. And so there's a severe lack of prevention resources available where maybe somebody got a little bit behind, maybe they lost their job or there was a medical emergency or their car broke down and they needed to pay $2,000 in repairs. So relatively small amounts of money in the big scheme of things. But nobody can help them until they have that first eviction order from their landlord. And so they're doing the best that they can, but we need them to fail first before we actually help them. And so that's why we have in Michigan like a huge influx of people into that eviction court system. And I'm now horrified to find out, based on the keynote speakers, that if they have an eviction filed, that's going to hurt their credit scores, which, as you'll see, will like tumble down the line and escalate all of these problems, okay? And so I think that there's a kind of a lack of awareness about the ramifications of filing an eviction on somebody. What we also see that's kind of unique to the state of Michigan compared to other states is that landlords use eviction filings as a way of getting tenants to pay rent, as opposed to in other states, there are other mechanisms to do that before eviction. Like eviction is the last resource or the last resort that you've tried everything to get this tenant to pay rent. Whereas in Michigan, it's kind of like the first thing that you do. As soon as you're a month late or a few $100s short, we're gonna start that paperwork right there.
Professor? You know
Yes.
how I said I wasn't going to rein you in?
Oh, please do.
That was a lie, so.
That was a lie?
Yes, I'm reining you in. If I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A. So
Yes.
Can we get 5 more minutes?
Oh, I thought you meant that what I was speaking out was like, okay.
No. Just a time check.
Okay. Time check, yes. And again, this might be organization specific. Thank you. All right. Okay, so once we get in that eviction process, at least in Oakland County, there's such a limit of places for people to go. We have, I think, less than 130 shelter beds in Oakland County for the entire population. And so there's just literally nowhere for people to go. Let's see. Okay, qualification process. We already talked about the paperwork needed to document yourself. Income verification has gotten much more difficult. People are paid in such wonky ways. Like you can get paid on PayPal, Cash App. If you don't have a bank account, then you can't really verify that. So it becomes difficult to even verify the money that you do make. And then the voucher paperwork is really difficult to understand once you get it. And trust me, I've tried to understand this. There's this whole thing with utilities that I cannot figure out how to calculate. Okay, so housing search. There's a lot of problems in this. So again, the same lists are given to hundreds of people, and they often don't have properties available. We also know that there are a ton of scams out there. So there's catfishing happening in the rental industry where people will literally steal pictures of houses online and market them as available. They'll take application fees, they will take security deposits, and then they ghost people. And so people who don't have any extra resources have lost all of the resources. We also know that there's no timeliness in getting back to individuals. Landlords are not restricted in the number of applications that they can take for an individual unit, and so they're taking way more than they can actually house. And so as a result, you have to apply to so many places and pay those fees at so many places and all of the junk fees in order to hopefully hit the lottery and find something that meets those criteria. All of the fees, and then landlord requirements aren't always transparent. So will they take people with an eviction or a criminal history or a poor credit score? And we know, again, some of our most vulnerable populations aren't going to meet these criteria. Okay, so getting approval, so once we find a landlord that's going to take this voucher, then we have to go through the inspection process. And this, again, varies dramatically from organization to organization based on their staffing and their own kind of internal processes. But we've seen it take months to get that first inspection of a unit. The inspection, even though the requirements should be pretty standardized, the inspectors kind of vary on the level of detail that they are going to ding landlords for. Some people will ding them for very minor things that don't necessarily make a place uninhabitable, like this closet is missing a door, or maybe there's some peeling paint here that could fairly easily be remedied. And so then they come back for a second inspection. And so we've seen people wait 2 months in order to get the inspectors back out there. And so think about it from the landlord perspective. They're holding an empty unit during those times, not receiving payment, and that's not going to be possible for a lot of landlords. They are business owners, especially our smaller mom and pop landlords, and so they can't necessarily take on that burden as well. Okay, and then staying housed, some of the lease violations are on the tenant's part. Sometimes they will have unauthorized people living there. Sometimes, it's intentional. They leave people off the lease that they know are going to be living there. Sometimes they just have to take in friends and family, kind of double up in housing because their family members or friends have no other place to go.
Pets that they're not supposed to have.
They get pets that they're not supposed to have, so they are, doing criminal activity or smoking in the property. So there's lots of reasons that they might kind of break their lease and not stay in that place, or non-payment. But then we also see some landlord issues too, where landlords, once they get somebody in there, are not making major repairs. Like if the furnace goes out, the landlord might actually not fix it over the winter months, or maybe they will let mold grow in that unit. What we also see sometimes happening too is that landlords won't renew the lease. They let people go in a month-to-month lease, which automatically puts them in a vulnerable position, because if they miss a step, the landlord could say, sorry, at the end of the month your lease is terminated, you have to leave for literally no reason other than their own will. And so that puts people really kind of in a vulnerable position. Okay, addressing discrimination and bias. Shall I turn it over to you? I know that you had some more
Oh, no, go ahead. We can
slides
keep it
too.
rolling.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you don't need to literally turn it over to me. But I do have a few questions because I want to address specifically the bias that we're seeing, and I'm hoping that both can answer. You talked about how you got into this because you're actually a nutrition professor. Can you explain very briefly what a social determinant of health is and how housing overlaps discrimination as a social determinant of health?
How much
I
time?
said very briefly.
No, I cannot do that very briefly. Okay, how many people are familiar with the phrase social determinants of health? I don't want to preach to the
Excellent.
choir here. Okay, cool. So it's basically the things in our life that either help or hinder our success. So an easier one to think about is school. So if you grew up in a community that had a top quality school district, everybody graduates, we've got a ton of people going to college, getting degrees, getting great jobs that pay a good living, then that is a social determinant that is going to increase your likelihood of success and having a good job and enough money to pay for health care and safe housing. If you went to a very underperforming school, then you might not have those same opportunities and privileges that are available to you in life, and so you might end up not graduating from high school or not having basic job skills and competencies, and so you end up with a lower paying minimum wage job that is not going to help you afford rent or health care or any of those other basic necessities. And so it's going to be much more difficult for you to have safe, adequate housing that is consistent and reliable long term, and
Quick
that's
question.
not even talking about home ownership.
So before you even get to the point where you're maybe going to college, maybe going to high school, what determines what school you're going to?
Where your family lives.
Zip code.
Your zip code, yes.
Your zip code.
Your zip code or your ability, your family's ability to take you to another school of choice. So if you've got money and transportation to get your child to a neighboring school district that might be performing better, or paying for private school for your children. But what that does, I'm a big proponent of public schools, is it drains resources from the public schools. So they're not getting the state funding. Oh gosh, I'm going way deep into it.
No, I mean, it's important. As it relates to people who are seeking housing, in your experience, where do people want to live?
They want to live in communities that are nice and beautiful and safe and have things for them to do.
And have good schools.
And have good schools,
Right.
yeah.
And so when we add discrimination to the mix, when we, have a system that perhaps isn't adequately enforcing fair housing, or we have systemic discriminations, what is the impact on a renter who is trying to navigate this system but has all of these overlapping problems? And please feel free to jump in, Mr. Barnes.
I want to jump in on the previous question.
Absolutely.
So, at DFC, we think about housing in the context of the community. So we think about building thriving and resilient communities that not only get housing right, but get economics right, that has green space, that allows for people to not only own these homes or live in these homes, but have a community, a block club, places where the kids can go play. We think about communities and housing more than just the four walls that you're in, but the community and the neighbors that you're affiliated with, and seeing everyone thrive in that regard. So we think about, searching for, a lot of people are looking for a thriving, resilient community, a place that was maybe like somewhere you grew up, if you grew up in one of those, or a place that you aspire to. So that's something that we look at, and we try to, not only look at the four walls, but look at the other things outside when you're coming out. Is it safe? Are there stores there? Is there a local shop where the local entrepreneur is there, et cetera? So those things for building a thriving community.
Do you feel a sense of belonging in that community?
Absolutely, and that's the block clubs, and not to get all in the weeds with that, but just, the way that you stay connected to the community, and the more you're connected, you're more likely to stay.
Yeah.
And again, I want to go beat a dead horse, but as the incomes and rents, align as well. So thriving and resilient communities, that's where people want to live, and that's what we look to find the research and connect with people who can help us build those.
So with regard to your specific information, Detroit Future City, and the info that you have, what is the biggest impact, discriminatory impact on individuals who are unable to find those neighborhoods and find those communities? Where is that failing?
Yeah, by and large, and I showed it in one of the first slides, is economics. I think that, to figure out this affordable housing piece, government has a piece in it, landlords have a piece in it, everybody has a piece. But if an individual can't afford to live anywhere, that's going to be a problem. So we have to look at incomes. And a part of what we're doing in our Thriving and Resilient Communities work is we're looking at careers, job opportunities, other things outside of just housing, to say, okay, well, if we can get you to a point where you can afford to live somewhere, now you can have a choice. Because one of the things we showed in the data up there was a lot of people don't even have a choice. 45% of the market is available. People's income is where it is. Rent is where it is. So it's not even an option for a lot. So, it's tough.
Yeah, for our voucher holders, if they can find a single landlord with a unit available that will take them, like, that is their option, and most of them can't meet that criteria within the time limit and lose their voucher. So there's literally no choice within that system.
Or if you do have a choice, it's somewhere where, the pipe might not work, or the banister may be off, but because of, where I am financially, because of where I am for the rent, this is where I have to be. So I'm not in a thriving community a lot of times because of the income situation, so I always lean on that as being one of the most important.
So I appreciate what you just said about the pipe not working or the banister. What is the relationship between discrimination and code compliance? I didn't say they'd be easy questions.
I thought about that in doing the research. I wonder, because as we looked at our landlord typologies, I wondered, if we're looking at mom and pop landlords, for example, who are just able to keep their property, afloat, and then processes where it may keep, you're going through a voucher process that may take 30 days, 40, 60 days. So I want to think about it from two ways. One, sometimes the code enforcement may not be because of a want to. It may just be a financial issue. I bought me a property at a land bank lot, for example, and I want to get it up and going, and I'm using everything I have, and I got it up going just enough to get somebody in because I know they'll pay for it. I may not be thinking about compliance as much because I need somebody in here, or I can get compliance once I get somebody in here. So it's a messy kind of situation. But I try to, like we said, we lead with good intention. I would say, maybe it's not necessarily always the renter or the landlord is trying to be a slum landlord. It's just maybe, everybody is on very thin margins, and that could be the issue. One of the many issues, I would say.
Yeah, can I add to that
Absolutely.
too? And so, again, I think all of the landlords want to take pride in their properties. And so we've had some small landlords that have one or two houses in Pontiac that they know that their property can't meet code. They know what they need to do to fix it, but they cannot find a contractor to actually come in and do that work because there's just such a shortage. And these contractors can go take much higher paying jobs elsewhere. They don't want to do some of the smaller projects that the other landlords will need. There's also another bigger systemic issue as well that kind of has become visible for the last few years in Pontiac is that the city of Pontiac itself, if you know the history, went through near bankruptcy and emergency financial management, and they cut all of the city staff and services down to bare bones or less, and so they didn't have code enforcement capabilities to go out there and make sure that these houses were safe for individuals. And so as the city has come back in the last few years, one of the things that they have really prioritized is building inspections, making all rental units have to register and be inspected. They've also created a system where if the rental unit does not meet code criteria, that the tenant can put their money in an escrow account on a monthly basis until those issues are fixed, and the landlord has a certain amount of time to fix them, and if it doesn't, they give the money back to the tenant. And so that's just one of those policy things or systems thing that can actually help reduce some of the discrimination and bias in these cases.
I want to jump in for one moment. I had a question because we didn't get a chance to get to it. You mentioned a list of junk fees that people going through the process are forced to pay. That's another, I think, a policy issue that can be resolved in making the process a lot smoother. And so I guess we can go offline and talk more about what they are.
Yeah, well, I know that there's a policy section happening simultaneously right now, and I hope they're talking about some of the stuff that's happening at the state level with regards to source of income discrimination. Because most landlords will require tenants to have 2 or 3 times the monthly rent in income, but if you are a voucher holder, it literally means you don't have that income. And so in other states, they require landlords to accept the voucher as a certain calculation towards your income and won't allow landlords to not rent to you because of that. And so that's, again, there's some nuanced things that we can look at our examples from across the country and see what's working that we can adopt in the state of Michigan.
I do want to open it up to questions. Does anyone have a question? So many. Sheila will be coming around with a microphone, and we'll get to as many as we can.
Should we sit down or stand? Should we dance?
My question is for Dwayne. You put up a graph or a chart of information that you all had collected about landlords and tenants. My question is, and I should preface this, I live here in Detroit. Of that data regarding the landlords and the more so the property management landlords, do you specifically know how many of those were licensed? And when I say licensed, have a real estate broker's license to be property managing and landlording?
Okay, I'll answer this real quick. No, but what I want to do is let's get together. I can get that data point to you. So before we're done today, I want to get your information. I'll definitely find that information and see if we can get it to you.
Because we're having a problem with that in 36th District Court. People without standing are taking tenants to court. Nobody's asking for their broker's license, and they're throwing people in the street with no standing.
That's interesting. I want to talk more about that.
Hi, my name is Brendan Bell. I am with Affirmations LGBTQ+ Community Center in Ferndale. I was thinking through, I guess my question, is for both of you, but I think probably more for you, talking through the Section 8 situation. The community I primarily work with right now is the trans and non-binary community, especially with housing. I see something that I am seeing a lot of with the Section 8 process is a lot of trans and non-binary folks are avoiding the shelter system because they are afraid of discrimination. In that system, a lot of them go to that and are either turned away from the shelter or are asked to go into the shelter and go into and present as a gender that they are not comfortable identifying with. And so they avoid that system. And so homelessness for them looks like couch surfing a lot, which then they do no longer qualify under HUD as literally homeless. And so they consistently are deprioritized in the homeless system. And so I guess my question is, what are we doing systemically to kind of face this particular form of housing discrimination towards that community?
So I don't think that that was actually a question, and I think that was a statement, because what I see is not much to address that very specific population and some other systemic issues. And so, like, what we've seen on the ground is that these housing organizations that know they have no resources, they know that they're not getting any more vouchers anytime soon, they're telling people to couch surf, to double up. Do you have anybody that will let your family stay in the basement, or can you get an RV and park on somebody's property? So, like, these organizations are unofficially telling people to do exactly that. And then when you look at the shelter system, the gender issues become so much more complicated, because we will see, even when we have cisgendered women, they don't want to go to the shelters where there are primarily cisgendered males that might not be behaving appropriately towards them. And so we, in Oakland County at least, don't even have same-sex shelters. But when you think about our non-binary individuals, that makes that even more complicated. And so I haven't seen that being talked about a lot, and so I just thank you for bringing that issue to everybody's awareness, because that is definitely a huge priority population.
I would like to add that something that I can speak to is that we recently amended the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act in the state of Michigan to include sexual orientation and gender identity as specific protected bases. So we were still yes, this is fantastic. So we were taking complaints on the basis of sex, but we now actually have specific language in the statute to protect those populations. So if you are working with individuals who have been discriminated against a homeless shelter or by a homeless shelter or something along those lines, please seek out the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. Those individuals can do an intake interview, potentially have they'll have a housing investigator speak to them. They can talk more about resources, determine whether or not there's enough information for us to take a complaint and an investigation. We are a neutral third party, but we absolutely will be able to at least assess the concern.
Can we add, too, that these individuals often have been ousted from their family of origin, and so might not have as many resources as others, and so we need to kind of consider that nuanced lived experience. And one of the things that I keep saying overall about this system is that we are putting the burden of going through all of these complicated processes on the most vulnerable members of society that have limited time and resources to be doing this, and often have lived experiences of trauma, and this system just adds even more trauma to that. So anything that we can do to create a more dignified and humane housing access system is going to be so crucial.
Hi, my name is Rochelle. I work with the Fair Housing Center of Metropolitan Detroit. So you can I can give you my card as well. They can call our office if they are in Wayne County, Macomb County, and Oakland County. But one of the things that you guys mentioned, or you mentioned, is staying housed. We deal with housing discrimination, as we all know, but one of the majority of the calls we're getting is about staying housed. And the biggest issue is that with housing choice vouchers, tenants are paying their portion, but they're having a hard time getting Section 8 to pay theirs. And so I have a landlord, I've actually had several landlords call me, and what they're trying to find out is if they can stop receiving Section 8 without being discriminatory, because it's not the tenants, and that's not what they want, but they're not getting paid by those Section 8 voucher organizations, which is what a lot of people are dealing with outside of, for the tenants part is, after failing inspection, they are not offered other places to go live at all, or they're not following up on those inspections and still living in these homes that should not have passed in the first place before they got moved in. And so my question is, if anybody here or you guys have resources to send these individuals, because when they call us, I am just throwing them in the wind, because the moment that they don't fall under discrimination, my resource list for them gets lower and lower when it's
Yeah.
just those things.
Yeah, so that question, the base of that question is far above my pay grade, and if there's anybody from the official organizations, I would please ask you guys to chime in. Yeah, well, and so there's a couple of things that, like, I can answer that might be going on there. So if there has been a change in ownership or management, sometimes they, as a whole, can stop accepting vouchers, and then that displaces an entire population, especially when it is like a multi-unit complex, and so that's been problematic in local areas. The not passing inspection means that HUD will stop paying for that voucher, but again, there's no making sure that that family has another place to go. They go through that whole process of having to find somewhere, and they're usually given 30 days to find someone that will meet their criteria and take Section 8 housing. And so we see that being especially difficult for our very large families. And so we've had nonprofit organizations that have had to step up and pay monthly rent until they can convince the landlord to fix the issues to keep this family housed. And so that's been an issue. But does anybody else want to chime in on like can they stop paying?
Just an FYI, I'm with Detroit Eviction Defense, but I'm not an attorney. What that sounds like maybe is an abatement, and sometimes the tenant gets the notice and sometimes they don't. But the other part of that is it's a section, and I can't remember, it's on a HUD form 432 something. But basically, it tells the landlord right then and there, you can't.
Not evict the tenant, or you shouldn't even be saying anything to the tenant if HUD is not paying you. As long as the tenant is paying you, your grievance is with HUD. And there are landlords who, even though they signed that contract and it says that, will take the tenant to court anyway. The tenant should also take a look at the contract. The landlord's not gonna give it to you. You can FOIA it, or you can download the form right online. It's the number. And it tells you in section, I think it's 3 or section C. It's one of them. Number D tells you that you can't evict the tenant if you don't get paid by the housing authority, the PHA, HUD, whoever. You can't evict them. The tenant is to keep paying their portion even when HUD is not paying, but they are not supposed to be evicted. Now, if it goes into abatement, whether it's the landlord's fault, the tenant's fault, once it's been abated, the tenant has to move. And that is a problem. If the tenant refuses to move after the abatement, then the landlord can evict them.
Hello, good morning or afternoon. My name is Teddy. I'm from Detroit. I'm from Detroit Black Advocacy. I live here in Detroit. I have a question for the both of you on the panel here. What are some possible solutions that you have for people with disabilities who are looking for a house to buy or a house to rent, but they have so many, different websites and information that aren't really clear and accessible to them? They don't really, point out the specific areas that they need accessibility in. Do they have a wheelchair ramp, or do they have strobe lights? How can we make better resources accessible for our disabled community when we're going to buy a house or we want to rent an apartment? How do we find that accessibility list? I notice that there's a lot of challenges myself when I'm looking for housing and a place to rent. I see, a place to rent, and I'm trying to find out if it's accessible, but I can't tell if it's, more accommodating for older people, but I'm young and I'm deaf. So I want to make sure, that apartment has a light or an alarm that lights up for me to see. There's a lot of different housing and apartments that, are popping up everywhere in Detroit, but they're not accessible for us deaf and disabled people. I know there's a lot of disabled people fighting for funding, for the ability to make sure the building's accessible. So what can we do to make sure that that's prioritized for people with disabilities, so that they have funding, make sure landlords have that information when they're renovating their properties, to make sure that those things are accessible for us. We shouldn't have to come and ask over and over for that. That should already be prioritized. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Okay. A great question. I think And this is more of my general recommendation before I get to your specific question. The people that I have found to be most successful at navigating this system have found an organization or an individual that understands the system that can work directly with them on their behalf throughout the entire process. Sometimes it is the official organizations. More often I've seen it's the nonprofit organizations that are willing to make sure that you get help. With the disability population specifically, I would highly recommend that you work with those local nonprofit organizations that know the systems and the barriers and can help negotiate on your behalf. What I've seen as well is that, and again, these are places where you can't necessarily prove discrimination, but when I am in a meeting with somebody going through this system, that person is taken far more seriously than if they were in that meeting by themselves. And it sucks, and it shouldn't be happening that way. But when you see it, you have to believe it and kind of fight for a better system. I think what is hopeful is that that is a category of discrimination that complaints can go to the state and be proven. And there's a lot more resources once you do tap into that. But yeah, I think those local organizations are going to be the most helpful in a very complex, broken system.
Absolutely, I echo that sentiment as well. I also like to start with, I'm big on putting city council in the dons and things. They work hard, they have the bandwidth, so I would always start with getting someone who knows the system a little bit better. And then from there, just don't let them off the hook until they can help you find some answers. Because I think, these systems are meant to be opaque, they're meant to be complex, and sometimes we just need a little help navigating through those processes.
I'm going to kind of jump off this because part of the concern, I think, is that so many of the landlords are those mom and pop landlords that you said, those people who own 1 or 2 properties. And so what would be the best way to and most efficient way to ensure fair housing process for all of these, individuals who own the biggest share of the housing market? It's not like we can just go to one entity and say you're discriminating against people, or your housing isn't accessible, or where's your modification policy? Like, how can we get that out to those mom and pop folks?
Absolutely. I'm gonna stop turning this off, I promise you. But absolutely, I definitely think it starts with information and education. I wonder, has there been a convening of landlords who will be willing to talk about their perspective on it? I wonder, has there been a look at the policies that they have to adhere to, and that maybe there's some updating that needs to be done? Like, I wonder if there needs to be more on the advocacy on the policy side to ensure that some of the issues that we're bringing up here in community are taken back, and we can actually see a change in policy. So now that landlords have to do X, Y, and Z, now maybe they have to adhere to A, B, and C. But I think it's a policy issue, and it's an information and engagement issue as well.
There's someone right behind you, Sheila. Oh, you've got one? Okay, we'll do 2 more then.
Hello, my name is Keyshawn Wade. I'm from Flint. I go to Cornell University. And my comment / question / analysis / whatever is mainly stemming from the fact of a lot of things that I heard Jennifer and Dwayne bring up. Specifically around capacity building for landlords who may be smaller, but also some who are kind of skirting on the skates of trying to make sure they are passing inspections and different things like that. So mainly, and also to highlight some of the things that the person highlighted in their comments about ADA accessibility and different things like that. I gave testimony to the Civil Rights Commission about the need to decommodify housing. In essence, because commodification brings about discrimination, and people are being discriminated against on the basis that they are not able to generate profit for these individuals who are representing the private sector and that I'm trying to choose my words carefully. Their purpose as residents is to generate profit for these private entities. So I guess my question is, why are we not focusing on creating publicly owned and permanently affordable housing that is in the control of the public and has oversight by democratically elected folks? Two, limiting speculation and profit making in housing, and focusing on the ways in which discrimination is being countered against people who can't give people enough money to make a profit. I think specifically for disabled people, they're on a limited income, and it's not profitable to house them. So of course they're going to be discriminated against. And then also bolstering community-led efforts to collectively own and manage their own housing in limited equity housing cooperatives and different organizations that they are able to manage themselves and steward their own housing and upkeep of their housing in a way that's not putting the concern of your personal mortgage on this property and your own financial whatever hoopla to make a profit or turn a profit.
You want to take it? I
Professor
can take
Lucas,
that.
I'm not doing that.
You know, what I want to pull from what you said, great insight. I was wondering about that as well, as far as, I guess is a wrong term for it, but social housing that is controlled. If you take a look through history, we saw through, the 60s, the 70s, into the 80s, where some of that social housing didn't end up as promising as it should. But I think that is something that we have to look at in this new time. I think that we need a lot of solutions right now as far as housing is concerned. Decommodify housing. That's interesting. I want to talk to you about that. Collective ownership. These are all interesting, I think, perspectives that need to come into the lexicon of these conversations that we're having, because we do have to kind of figure out that situation. Along the sides of the dollars and cents, that's always the tough one. Banks give loans to people who want to get homes, to landlords. They want to collect rent with the intent of, coming up a little bit. So it's hard to disconnect some of those financial ends. But with young minds like yourself, I would love to hear how you would see us solving those problems and begin those conversations together.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question, if you can make it quick.
Hello, my name is Ava, and I'd like to preface quickly that I'm not from Wayne County or the surrounding area. I'm from Lenawee, so if anything, I'm closer to Toledo, cornfield land. Anyways, I work at Share the Warmth of Lenawee. It's an emergency shelter, and I have had multiple of my guests be told that when they list that they are unhoused or that they live at Share the Warmth, first of all, there's only 3 shelters, so they know the shelters. They get told that I will not rent to you because you are homeless and because you're in a shelter. And I had contacted Fair Housing. I wasn't sure who to contact, and they're not a protected class of people. But it was
That's
literally because they were homeless, so I didn't know what to do. So if we're talking about bringing about policy and change, I know that this would be like vague and difficult to do, but possibly looking into homelessness being one of those categories, because most homeless folks are already in these categories anyways. Like, I work with them, see them every day. So I don't know what else can be done about that. I was basically told to reach out to legal aid, and most of the guests are like apprehensive to that. They've had bad experiences. So
We can speak after to let you know some more about the protected classes and whether or not someone's using that as a pretext for potential discrimination. So I can give you a little bit more info on that. But you're correct. Unfortunately, homelessness by itself is not considered a protected class. So I want to thank our panelists so much.